Some problems were never meant to be fixed or even attempted, but I don't think I got that email. And besides, if it was already broken, can I really make it worse? And I figure there's no harm in trying, and if you do end up fixing it, well, you saved yourself a whole lot of money. In today's video, we're going to be taking a second look at this Lawn Boy mower. And the problem is that the self-propel is not working like it should be. But on top of that, one of the wheels is also not spinning. However, that means the problem is not your typical one, and it's not going to be easy to fix. And once we get the wheels serviced and spinning smoothly, we'll put the mower back on the ground and start it up and show you the problem it's having. As you just saw, only the left wheel was spinning when the self-propel was turned on. And you might be thinking that one wheel should be good enough, however that won't matter much with the other wheel not able to spin. Depending upon the type of self-propel your mower has, one working wheel might be enough. However, with most rear-wheel drive systems, things can get a bit complicated as you're about to see. So you might be wondering why I'm draining the fuel and oil, and that's because we need to put this mower on its back to inspect it. So as you saw earlier, the wheel that won't turn is the right drive wheel. But after taking the wheel off the mower, it turns out the wheel itself is just fine, and it's the drive system that's stuck. But of course, since the mower is on its back, the problem side will be on the left side of the screen. And as you can tell, this side is working just like it should be, however the other side only moves a little bit. This pretty much confirms it. The problem is inside the transmission, which I hate to admit this, is not meant to be serviced. So I can either replace this transmission, or I can take this one apart and see what went wrong with it. So why do I call this transmission unserviceable despite having screws that you can remove? Well, the screws are meant to hold the housings together, while the sealant is what's keeping the oil from leaking out. The sealant virtually glues the housing together, which means taking it apart takes way too much effort. And to me, the use of sealant versus a gasket makes it unserviceable. And unless you have very specific tools to help separate the housings, you're going to end up damaging it, which is pretty much what I did. As you can see, the sealant did a really good but messy job of keeping the oil inside the transmission. But we are more interested in how this transmission works, and that's when things start to look a bit clearer. The outer disc is connected to the axle with a pin, and when turned in one direction, the gears will not lock. But if turned in the other direction, they'll lock and send power to the wheels. So that's what's happening on the working side. But what about the other side? Unfortunately, things are not as good there. Now the gears are not stuck together, but they don't seem to want to separate either. Something's keeping the other gear from moving away from the inner one. And looking at the good side, you'll notice the pin and how it passes through the shaft and sits in the gear. But on the bad side, you don't see a pin there, at least on this part of the gear. So luckily the pin is still there, but what it seems like is that it's come free from the groove it sits in. And after a bit of poking and prodding, we were able to get it out. It doesn't appear to be damaged, so why did it come loose? So at first, I was thinking it had basically worn down and was able to unseat itself from the gear. But since the gear is made out of plastic, it's more likely that the plastic is what gave up instead. So to fix it, I should probably replace the plastic gear for a brand new one. The problem is I'd rather sell you the entire transmission and not just a gear. So how do I plan on fixing this one? Simple, I'm going to melt the plastic to help hold the pin. This is not the best option, but with the choices we have, this is the cheapest one if I want to keep this self-propel. And once the pin is secured, we'll test it to make sure it's working like it should be. After that, we'll then clean off as much of the blue sealant as possible on both housings. Apply new sealant and then fill the lower housing with oil and then close it up. But there is one huge problem with the way I described filling it with oil, and that is that the lower housing is leaking. However, the lower housing in this orientation is actually the upper housing, and it's leaking past the seal for the input shaft. So unless you want to find a different way of doing it, I'm choosing to take out the entire transmission. That way we can fill the real lower housing with oil, which doesn't have an opening to leak past. But after watching this video, I think I have a much easier and faster way of doing this, but I'll leave that for a different project. Now, if I had known I was going to take out the entire transmission, I would have done it from the beginning. But at least I know now, and I can plan for it the next time I do this. So this was a lot of work even for me, but for some, this might be way too much work. If you didn't want to do it, I don't blame you. In fact, knowing that the entire thing has to come out might be a good enough reason to save time and more importantly money and just replace it instead. At the moment, this model of transmission can be bought for around $70, which isn't that bad. So if this was somebody else's mower, I would definitely ask them if they'd like to get a new one instead. And besides that, there's no way I can guarantee this kind of repair will last. If I didn't mention it already, this mower does belong to me. It's not one of my customers. But does it mean that I won't be selling it in the future? Well, I can't guarantee it, but I will let you know that I can't keep every mower I fix and will eventually need to sell them off at some point. It probably wasn't necessary to remove the belt and its guard, but I didn't want to have to deal with them later on. So do you think I put too much sealant on the housings? I know it looks messy, but I'd rather have it look messy than have to do this job again. Now, since the oil leaked out from the transmission when I had it on its back, I didn't see where the oil level was at. So I'm just going to fill it up as much as I can and then close it up, followed by the fasteners. Just make sure you install the fasteners by hand, otherwise you could damage the plastic. Keep in mind the sealant is the part that's supposed to seal the housing, so don't over tighten the screws. So here comes the hard part. I'm going to have to leave the transmission in this orientation until the sealant is somewhat dry. If I don't and the oil is able to get past the sealant, well, we'll have to go through this whole horrible process again. But to be honest, if I had to do this job again, I'd probably just pay these $70 and replace the entire transmission. So it turns out the input shaft seal had come loose, and after putting it back in place, it's not leaking anymore. There was one good thing about this process, and that was being able to do the maintenance on the drive system. That includes removing rust from the shafts and lubricating all the moving parts. Fortunately, this one wasn't that bad because it didn't seem like it had a lot of time on the machine. However, that does make me wonder why the plastics wore out as fast as they did inside the transmission. What it boils down to is that it feels like most transmissions for lawnmowers aren't meant to last more than several years. So if you knew that an engine on a lawnmower would only last 10 years, but the transmission would only last 7 years, would you still end up buying it? Basically, you would use it for 7 years, but after that year, the self-propel would stop working and it became a push mower. I'm not sure if I would spend good money on it, but most consumers don't have much of a choice. So as you just saw, the wheels are working just like they're supposed to, but we won't know how well it works until we get it started back up. Now, I didn't show it to save time, but I did leave the mower sitting for a couple of hours on a large piece of cardboard, checking for leaks from the transmission. And luckily for us, there were no leaks from the transmission, and after adding some fuel and oil, we can now start it. And as you just saw, both wheels are now spinning and the mower is able to move under its own power unlike before. I will be the first to say it, I have no idea how long this fix is going to last. But if I had to guess and it makes it through the next couple of mows, it should be okay for a good while. So my question is, would you even attempt to repair like this or just make it a push mower instead? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.